Thanks, Anna. Can I just check that I'm being made co-host so I can share screen?
Yeah, you should be able to share your screen now.
Thank you. Great. Okay, hope everyone can see that. So I'm just going to talk you through the origins and purpose of our Know the Line campaign. And then I'm going to hand over to Christine to talk to you more about the latest phase of the campaign, which is focused on sexual harassment at work. So we first started developing this campaign as a result of a piece of work that the Women's Equality Party did, where they talked to women in Sheffield about what their priorities were for what they wanted. And a very high priority that came up was tackling sexual harassment in public places. And that was the beginnings of the discussions about developing the campaign. By the time we actually got to the launch point, it was in November 2017, and coincidentally, the Me Too movement started the previous month. So it must have looked quite impressive to some people that we were so quick to organise a local South Yorkshire campaign about sexual harassment in public places, hot on the heels of the Me Too movement. It was just really well timed from our point of view. So from those origins, launching the campaign in Sheffield, we then worked, to extend it across the whole of South Yorkshire. We've always had the intention of it being a South Yorkshire campaign. And we were aiming the campaign at these different groups of people, really. The men and boys predominantly who think it's okay to pester, harass and abuse someone because they're female. The women and girls whose lives are affected by that behaviour. Bystanders who potentially could be encouraged to call out the unacceptable behaviour, find ways to stand alongside those affected. We developed a series of slogans. The principle of the campaign was we would pair acceptable and unacceptable behaviours and create those as postcards and posters and social media posts to draw attention to those. And we'll see some of those postcards in a bit. And then we developed a phase of the campaign that was about public transport, managed to get a bit of funding from the Lush charity pot to pay for advertising because it's such expensive space. All we could actually afford was the Supertram stops, and we did that on 2 occasions in 2019. And now the latest phase, as I said, is extending the campaign to sexual harassment at work. And Christine will tell you about the work we've been doing with Paul Blomfield MP, with the Trades Council, and the Sheffield Star newspaper got on board with it as well, which has been really great for extending the reach of the campaign. So some of the background information that we've quoted since the start, really, that draws attention to the scale of the problem. And you can see there the sort of readily available data that's out there about the extent of it, affecting women and girls, women and young women primarily, but starting right from school age, as we'll see later. So the experiences of 18 to 24-year-olds were particularly stark, particularly high percentages, and more than 1 in 4, they had experienced sexual harassment before the age of 16, often while wearing school uniform. And only a very small proportion said that anyone had tried to help them or stepped in and that they wished someone had. So there's a real issue there about bystander intervention. There's a quote here from this Women and Equalities Committee report that was published in 2018 that I think is quite useful for you to just read. Very clearly a message from government stating that this behaviour shouldn't be acceptable, it shouldn't be normalised, and that the government should show leadership in eradicating sexual harassment and making public places safe. And hopefully the work that Paul Blomfield's doing with us now might help to move that on, potentially nationally, not just in our local area. Okay. I won't talk through all of these, but there were various other things that were referred to as useful resources for evidence to in support of our campaign, including one from the NUS where young women were saying that basically getting groped was just a part of a normal night out. They just had to take it for granted. Okay. And the reason that we felt it was so important to focus on sexual harassment, even if individual incidents in themselves may not seem particularly serious. The message that we want to get across to people is it's that casual misogyny, that everyday sexism that creates the environment where sexual harassment is normalised, and that is at the part of the continuum of behaviour that can go through harassment in schools and colleges from a young age, happening on public transport, calling from vehicles, stalking, groping in pubs and clubs, indecent exposure. All that is the start of a continuum that ends in issues like rape and serious sexual assault, kidnap, murder, other forms of violence against women and girls, domestic and sexual abuse, domestic homicides, and the female suicides that are related to experiences of abuse where women feel that they have no other way out than to take their own lives, sadly. And part of the success story of this is that alongside the work of the campaign, we were doing work through Vida Sheffield, the organisation that I work for, with our partners in Sheffield in the violence against women and girls sector. And we managed to do a really good piece of work to make sure that the new domestic and sexual abuse strategy for Sheffield is now gendered, whereas it had become a gender neutral document. So now there is a specific priority within there to tackle all forms of violence against women and girls. And here are some examples of the postcard campaign, pairing acceptable and unacceptable behaviours. We're still open to suggestions for new versions of these. And we realise there's a slight issue with the look and leer version, because apparently some of the younger people that we've consulted don't know the word leer. They don't use that word. They didn't really know what it meant. So not such a good one. But as you'll see in a minute, we did manage to come up with a local Yorkshire version that Christine will show you in the Sexual Harassment in Public Places campaign. Okay, Christine, over to you, and just say next slide whenever you want me to advance.
I'll put on my very best Chris Whitty voice, but thank you for that. So what is sexual harassment at work, which is where we are moving our campaign into this area? As with all types of harassment, it's based on the perception of the person experiencing it. It can be very small microaggressions right up to one big incident. It doesn't matter what that is. This is something that the trade unions have put together as a working definition, and I think it makes it very clear. So sexual harassment is unwanted behaviour which violates your dignity, makes you feel intimidated, degraded or humiliated, and creates a hostile or offensive environment. And the important thing is you don't need to have previously objected to someone's behaviour for it to be considered unwanted, because that would, realistically, be impossible. You'd have to give everybody a long list of all the things you didn't want them to do. So it's based on the perception of the person experiencing it. And then there is also the effect or intention behind the behaviour. It's a form of unlawful discrimination under the Equality Act. And this says that sexual harassment, if the behaviour is either meant to, so someone may deliberately want to violate your dignity, or probably most importantly, in many occasions, has the effect of violating your dignity or creating a poor environment, a hostile, degrading, humiliating or offensive environment. And so that is very much, as I said earlier, on the perception of the person experiencing it. Next slide, please. So examples of sexual harassment at work. As Maureen said, a lot of these have become so commonplace that we don't always think that this is what it is, but it can be. Sexual comments or jokes, can be physical behaviour when someone touches you, which might be as casual as an arm around you when you don't want it, right up to a direct sexual assault. Can be displaying pictures. I think my image goes back to the 70s, when every garage used to have pin-ups of naked women, and that would have the impact of making women going into those places feel very unhappy and feeling discriminated against. It might be drawings of a sexual nature. And now a whole new area recently of sending emails or social media messages with sexual content, and that is an unwanted sexual content. So there are lots of things that could be classed as that, and I'm sure you're all familiar with other types where it might be something like it's always the new person in the team, often a woman, who gets asked to make the tea or take the minutes. Or it might be social events which a team which might have been predominantly or all men have always gone to a venue that a new member of the team may feel uncomfortable in. So it is whatever you feel it to be, if it makes you feel that it is sexual harassment, basically. It's the experience of the person who defines it. So why do we need a campaign? Maureen's gone through a lot of these statistics that we've used for our campaign against sexual harassment in public places, but there is a report about work, still just a bit of banter, which says that over half of the women in the UK have experienced sexual harassment at work. 52% have been victims of unwanted sexual behaviours, from groping to inappropriate jokes, and this is much higher, 63% of women aged 16 to 24. And one of the disturbing elements of this is that 20% of women reporting the person said it was their manager or someone in a position of authority. So it's first of all someone who they would expect to not do this. It's someone who they expect to take a lead from and to actually deal with this situation. And it's also someone who is in a position of power over them, so that if they complain, we've heard stories of people having their hours reduced if they're on 0 hours contracts. We've heard reports of people being taken off projects that they've been working on because they are seen as the problem. And so all of these things need to be changed. And that's one of the reasons that we need a campaign against sexual harassment at work, not only to stop the behaviour, but to stop the consequences of reporting that behaviour, and to make sure that that sort of behaviour is taken seriously. So next slide. So we rejigged our postcards because they were 2 or 3 years old. We were approached by Paul Blomfield, as Maureen mentioned earlier, and he had been approached when he was giving a talk to some young women at one of the schools he went into, to say that they were getting an awful lot of sexual harassment in the entertainment venues and restaurants and pubs and clubs that they were working in. And so we came up with some new postcards to launch on International Women's Day last year in November, which we at the time thought was going to coincide with the general opening up of the leisure and entertainment industry, which obviously didn't happen. And so we relaunched it. It all went quiet again because that sort of work wasn't available. And we relaunched it again in May to coincide with the ending of the second lockdown. The Star, as Maureen said, has been very supportive of this. They've carried a major story about once every 4 weeks. But our postcards here, we've adapted them to work. So we've changed the sorts of things. So do your colleagues make indecent or suggestive remarks? That is sexual harassment at work. And you need to know where the line is. And we need to start thinking about how we talk about this, which is part of what this whole event is about breaking the silence and starting to talk about these things. And have you been afraid to speak out because you haven't felt you'd be supported, or you'd have work taken away, or you'd be taken off the project you're working on? This is the Yorkshire one, A-Up Touch Up. We did check this out with some students who had heard of A-Up, unlike Leering. So we like that one because it makes it very grounded in Yorkshire. So we are saying sexual harassment at work, know where the line is. On the back of the postcard, there are links to our website. So if you could move on, next slide, please. And our website, we have a series of resources and support for people who are experiencing sexual harassment. So we've got links to sample workplace ShfWIT policies, so that if your workplace hasn't got one, it's easier to suggest getting one. If here's a template, you don't have to start from scratch, and it can just be adapted to your workplace. We've got links to useful organisations. So Rights of Women is particularly good. They're a free employment legal agent advice to women experiencing sexual harassment at work. Sheffield Needs a Pay Rise is a very local campaign, predominantly about getting decent pay in 0 hours contracts and that sort of thing. But they have a researcher who has been doing some of the research about what happens in the leisure industries, and they're very supportive of this. So if anybody needed to get in contact with a trade union in Sheffield, they're a very good starting point. And then, of course, there's local support services for people affected by sexual assault and abuse available for women and men in South Yorkshire. So if you go to our website, all the links for all of those organisations are there, and they are all available to help you. So the next thing is, what else can you do? And again, this is talking about breaking the silence, and it's really important that people do start to talk about sexual harassment at work. We've seen the great outpourings when it was Me Too, and how once someone started it, lots of women shared their experiences. There was the same thing with schools. Start talking about it and you will start sharing experiences. So talk to friends, colleagues, service users, family members, anybody that you feel you can just talk to them about the whole idea of sexual harassment at work, and that everybody needs to feel safe and supported in their workplace. You can distribute and display the materials that we've got. There again are on our website. There's postcards, there's posters you could put up at work. Perhaps start a campaign, not a campaign, campaigns would be good, start a discussion at work. We're always on the lookout for new and acceptable and unacceptable pairings. So if you have any ideas about that, send them to us and we'll get them printed up. This is the one we all hate saying, but you can help us to secure funding, because I think we've probably got about 10pence in the bank for this, which is where social media is great, because we can do that for nothing. But the campaign that we did on the trams was expensive, and we would like to do something similar to that. And also suggest new audiences to take the campaign out to. What we've always said is, we're happy, there's only 4 of us in Know the Line, but we're happy to come and talk, but you don't need to ask us about using our material. If you can use it and you feel confident about borrowing one of our talks, please do. Take it out there, make it relevant to your organisation, because this is all about finding your voice and being the change you want to see and breaking the silence. So there are lots of things that we can all do, and we just need to find a bigger voice to end this sort of behaviour, so that you feel comfortable and safe at work, whether you are an employee, whether you're going into a workplace as a client, or whether you are a customer of a workplace. You have a different role depending on how you appear in that workplace, but we all deserve to be taken seriously and not to be harassed in any of those roles. So that is the end of our presentation. Those are just our contact details. As Maureen said, I'm the chair of Know the Line, and Maureen is the director of VEDA, without which Know the Line would find it very hard to continue. So that's a little bit about us, and we're happy to take questions after Sarah's talk, which will talk more about breaking the silence and why it's so difficult to do that. Thank you.